Hello and welcome to Wise Women, the Vicar and the Witch. I'm Maggie Whitehouse and I'm the Vicar.
And I'm Suzi Crockford and I'm the Witch. We are perceived perhaps as being on opposite ends of a spectrum, but we're friends and we see the common threads of our different experience of the sacred. So please join us as we discuss
life, the universe and everything. Hello and welcome to Wise Women, the Vicar
and the Witch.
I'm Maggie Whitehouse.
And I'm Suzi Crockford.
And we started off with a range of topics so wide it's going to take us about a year to pull each element back and go through it. But I know where you want to start, but I'm going to be selfish and say I want to start. Would you please tell us about your work, how you do your healing work? Because it saved my life and I would like the world to hear about it.
Okay, we'll just start with the minor things then. Where to begin? Okay, I'm going to begin with the fact that healing is a word that comes from what I believe is the Anglo-Saxon word hail, which is our word whole, and that healing is calling back to wholeness. And that, for me, that's got implications which reach far beyond just the wholeness of us as individual humans. It speaks to the wholeness of the indivisibly interwoven little teeny thread of all existence that we are. And that knowing, that seeing that we are simply one thread in the great tapestry of life is, I think, where a capacity perhaps to work with the spirits who bring healing comes from. So as usual, there are about 10 things all trying to come out of my mouth at once, and I will perhaps jump among them. So a human being can't offer healing to another human being. Only the spirits can offer healing. But a human being can facilitate that healing for another human being. And the capacity to facilitate healing for another is almost entirely predicated upon one's capacity to get out of the way and to understand that it's not me, it's got nothing to do with me. So when you or anyone comes to receive healing here in what I know you love to call my witchy house. It's just a house.
It's a witchy house. It's a very witchy house. There's even a spinning wheel.
There's a spinning wheel because I spin. Let's not get sidetracked. So healing is offered by the spirits, and when you come to me to undertake a healing ceremony, the part of it that's my part is I have the witchy house. I have a kettle. I have tea. I offer you these things. I make you comfortable. I listen to your story so that you've got the opportunity to bring your story into the forefront of your own mind and to really be clear on what am I asking for. And you are not asking me for this thing that you are asking. You are asking yourself, and you are asking spirit, the divine, generally life with a capital L. And Suzi Crockford, having offered you tea and a listening ear, then calls to those spirits. So with my drum, I call to, and my song, the spirits who are utterly willing, more than willing, wanting us to remember who we are. They are wanting us to know and honour our wholeness in the great weaving that is all of life. And so I call to them and assemble around us in my consciousness and in your consciousness and in the consciousness of life and of spirit, a healing temple of wise, compassionate, utterly loving, all-knowing spirits. And then I pretty much step out of the way. All that Suzi Crockford's doing is banging a drum and holding an intention. And then spirit is coming, first of all, to be the temple, and then secondly, to go, okay, here are the ways in which you are not fully in alignment with exactly the thread you're supposed to be. So maybe through life, you have either frayed a little bit here or lost, perhaps you're supposed to be 3-ply and you've dropped one. And you've got attached to you perhaps some things that don't belong to you, because if we're not fully aligned, then things can catch on us. Or to put it another way, the very simple story which I tell people when they come to see me for healing is kind of within the body of thinking that we refer to as shamanism, which is God, as usual, 10 things trying to come out of my mouth at once. So shaman is a word that belongs to the Tungus people of Siberia. Shaman and shamanism are words which now have, yes, we've culturally appropriated them, but we culturally appropriated the word bungalow and the word jodhpurs and all kinds of other words. And, in fact, English would barely exist as a language, but for cultural appropriation, frankly.
One of these sessions we can go about what Christianity culturally appropriated too, right. But we'll come back to that. Please go
on. As far as I'm concerned, it's too late. That horse is already bolted. We're calling it shamanism, and most of us know what we are talking about when we use the word shamanism. We're talking about a world view which says everything is connected. Everything is made up of the same stuff. And in that same stuff of being interwoven and interconnected, what differentiates each of us is the dance we're doing within the great song of life, within the universe, the one song. Each of us is doing a different dance to a slightly different tune. It's a different tempo. There are different steps to the dance. And that extraordinary interweaving of all of our uniqueness is what creates that one song, the universe. And that what people, ancient wisdoms, modern wisdoms, people from all around the world have seen across time, the teachings of what we call shamanism are at least 75,000 years old, is that although we're all doing this amazingly unique dance, we're not dancing alone, we're dancing together. And that when something shocks us into a kind of moment in our dance, something that we might call trauma, some of the dancingness of us steps away, it steps out. And in our culture, that's madness. Why would a bit of you step out? For heaven's sake, you need all of you. But in cultures where wisdom is passed from mouth to ear down the generations, and everybody knows that everything is made up of the same stuff and interwoven and connected, and everybody knows that when you say you're feeling a little scattered today, that's actually quite a serious diagnosis. In those circumstances, we remember, I jumped out of my skin. I got beside myself with rage or with grief. Now I need to call myself back. And so the one that I'm calling back, that aspect of me that stepped out, they've been enjoying the sunshine, counting the cobwebs, whatever it is they've been doing, while we that have been going like, oh dear, this happened. And they come back able to go, sit down, love. Maybe have a sugar in that tea or cake with it or whatever it takes. They come back with the capacity for self-care and they bring wholeness because that's literally what they're bringing. They're bringing wholeness, and they stepped out in order not to suffer. So it's a safety valve. A bit of me steps out, the rest of me's slam my fingers in the door, whatever it is. When the bit of me that comes back, she can remember, plasters, and I know where the arnica is. Whereas if all of me sat there and suffered, then all of me is potentially traumatized, and so none of me can help me. So that's the realigning of threads, is calling us back to ourselves. And because everything is connected, everything is interwoven and made up of the same stuff, if a bit of me has stepped out or away, remembering these are metaphors, I'm making it sound really mechanistic, and it's not obviously as mechanistic as that, but these are metaphors that make it totally easy to understand. That if something steps out, then something else must step in. And we are categorically not, in the majority of cases, talking about some kind of, possession or whatever. We are talking about the spider in the bath. It's still energy, but it's not my energy. It's not doing the right dance. It doesn't know the steps, so it's no use to me. So I get the double whammy then of some of me stepped out, this new energy stepped in, it doesn't know all the steps, and oh my goodness, because I can't use it as energy, I now have to carry it around. And so I'm a bit weak and I get to carry baggage. It's truly a double whammy, as they say. And so what shamanic healing or my kind of healing does is it sees, here's the baggage, here's the thing that doesn't belong to you, that needs to be taken from you and returned either to where it does belong, or if it's not ethical to return it to where it belongs because perhaps it's, I give you my heart, perhaps it's someone else's little bit of their heart or something, then it's returned simply to a safe place. And what does belong to you is restored. And so balance is restored, power is restored, soul, strength, these things are restored. And that can then facilitate us, the individual who's now back into balance and harmony with themselves and with all of the rest that is, to carry on with their perfect, beautiful dance in the universe, in the one song. That was probably a bit of a ramble.
That was wonderful. By the way, if you can hear vague doghound noises in the background, there is a lovely little dog currently drinking his water in the kitchen, because we're sitting in Suzi's kitchen with is it a Rayburn or an Arga?
Neither. It's an essay.
A whatever oven thing. And we've got the doors open. I'm sure we should have shut the door and locked everybody out, but we've got life wandering through the kitchen, so you're going to get some background noise. Okay, I want to pick you up on a couple of things there. That was beautiful. And the parallel in the Judeo-Christian mysticism tradition is the Pargod, which is the great tapestry of creation. That all of creation is a tapestry of weaving. There's a lot in the book of Proverbs about wisdom weaving. And in fact, Origen, or Origin, however you pronounce it, one of the early church fathers, who was made anathema, thrown out for his terrible beliefs, but actually got rehabilitated later, did actually translate part of the Septuagint, which was an early Greek translation of the Hebrew, saying at the beginning it was the Elohim wove the heavens and the earth. And what we have today is a problem with the weave. We were talking about the yin and yang. And one of the things that brought us together as friends, Suzi did me the honour of coming to a Christmas solstice mass I did a couple of years ago. And each of the participants had to do a reading. And this is the reading that you picked. Do you want to read it?
Okay, where is it?
There it is.
Okay, so it's the 12th reading by Mother Mary Clare of the Sisters of the Love of God. And yes, I remember sitting in this mass and just thinking, oh my goodness, I have issue with only one word in this.
Change the word.
And I'm going to. And that is so beautiful and so true, and really showed me how we are really all singing the same song from the same hymn sheet. Here it goes. We must try to understand the meaning of the age in which we are called to bear witness. We must accept the fact this is an age in which the cloth is being unwoven. It is therefore no good trying to patch. We must rather set up the loom on which coming generations may weave new cloth according to the pattern God S provides.
I don't mind the S on that. That's fine. But that's where we're in total agreement between us. We need to reweave. For me, it's the Pargod. For you, it's a different terminology. But so much of this is just about language. And when you talk about healing, I don't do the kind of healing that you do. And my goodness, if I had the time, I would learn it. But I do masses. And I do, I've been trained in healing in a couple of other traditions. And I wouldn't actually have accepted ordination if I hadn't been a trained healer. Because Jesus was a healer, and I believe that every priest should have some knowledge of something about healing. But the Mass is the equivalent. And in my church we have a healing mass as well as requiem mass and an everyday mass, and particular masses for particular subjects. But what you do with the mass is the same thing as you summon the spirit with certain rituals and certain words and frankincense, and you have wine and you have bread. And the original teaching was that when God created the universe, or Goddess created the universe, or both created the universe, what they created first was the blueprint. And the blueprint in Greek is logos. Mm-hmm. So in the beginning was the logos. And we would actually call that blueprint Christ. It's got nothing to do with the human Jesus, who was able to manifest this blueprint. But the blueprint exists whether you know or care a flying what's it about Jesus. The blueprint is there. In Hebrew it's called Adam Kadmon, the primordial being. So everything comes from Adam Kadmon. And in Adam Kadmon there is perfection, and nothing is lost in the mind of God. So the dinosaurs are still in Adam Kadmon. The dodo is still in Adam Kadmon, in its whole essence, and possibly manifesting on other planets in this universe because it's big enough, and there are probably other universes too, so it's way bigger. Christianity is going to have such fun if we find another planet with humanoid beings on it, because it's going to go, no, you can't do that. Yes, we can, because it's the blueprint. The whole great one pattern. So what you do with the Mass is you invoke a certain ritual, especially with the Raphael Mass, which is invoking a ritual via the Archangel Raphael, which is one spirit, which is the line of healing. And you learn that all angels have one job, just one job. And Raphael is healing and communication, but they're the same thing, because most of our healing comes because we've miscommunicated with ourselves and with others.
Yeah, indeed.
And it's about shutting us up and lying us down and getting us to relax and come back to ourselves. So what I will do with the Mass is I will invoke spirit. I would call it Trinity. You can call it the spirits. It really doesn't matter. And there's a point at which after my ordination, my bishop wanted to see me do a Mass before he would actually sign the certificate. Mm-hmm. Because you aren't allowed to do a Mass before the ordination. And there's a point at which you go, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, and the rest of it. And I put my hand up, and he said he saw the light come down into my hand, which was beautiful, which then you used to bless. And again, it comes through me. It's got nothing to do with me. I'm the conduit. So then you bless the wine and the bread. And the other aspect of that is that the wine and the bread are the body of Christ, not Jesus. Christ, body of Adam Kadmon, the primordial being. So what you do, you say what God has given and human hands have made. So you're acknowledging relationship. It's all about relationship. God is a verb. Mm-hmm. It's all this idea of the flow, and when the flow is broken, you get sick, as we well know. So what I'm doing is saying, look, you gave us this, and we've made this, and we're giving it back to you, and together we'll eat it.
Yes, wonderful, which really speaks to all the ways in which, for me, witchness, if you like, is about really understanding and honouring the reciprocity implicit in having a human body. And that understanding that everything in life has been given to us by the gods and kind of is the gods. There are many ways of understanding the world and explaining the world which appear to be contradictory. And one of the things I love about this land and the kind of history of this land really is that I have been told, and firmly believe it, I believe it runs in my blood, that the ancient Celts had much respect for the notion of and rather than and or. And I see and in creation over and over and over again, and I think and is an essential concept for the understanding of the sacred. So all of matter is containing and is contained in spirit. So there are 100 different ways of saying that, and that if all of matter is contained in and contained in spirit, and all of matter is therefore both an emanation from the divine and an emanation of the divine. So it's both existing here and not existing there. So in my language, there's matter, there's what is, the world of thing, if you like, and then there's this other world that's both within it and around it, which is the world of no thing, which to me is called the void. And the void could be described as the womb of the goddess. And so all of existence has been birthed from the womb of the goddess. And then we, as tiny versions of the goddess, because we are made up of the goddess, also in our human forms have wombs. And I actually think it was you that told me that inside every man, just above his perineum, is a teeny weeny little meta womb, because all babies begin life as female. So the notion that the womb is, I mean, obviously a womb is a feminine thing, a female thing, but also the idea that we don't have that connection to the goddess if we happen to be in a man's body is not right. We do have that like void seed in us, all of us, and that because of that, there is nothing, literally there is no thing that did not come from the goddess or from God. I'm not especially attached either way. I mean, I say the goddess because my experience of the sacred is that it is both generative, receptive, utterly compassionate, and therefore I identify those things as being feminine.
Not female, but
not
feminine.
necessarily
yes.
female, yes. Because that would be a great slander to many of the men I love dearly, apart from anything else. But so, and I say it, you know, truthfully, as a slight kind of rude gesture to the patriarchy and to the notion of a male god and all that's brought with it. And without the patriarchy, I would be fervently searching for a word that didn't hold gender. I like the divine because it's not a gendered word. But anyway, that's a slight aside.
It's very difficult with the pronoun though, isn't it? Maybe we can call it they nowadays.
Yeah, because I don't have a problem with they, but I hate the word it. I'm offended by the word it. It separates us, in my opinion. And the word it has got a lot to answer for. Just on a quick side ramble, I don't believe that we would go around cutting down trees in quite the way that we do if we didn't refer to trees as it. Imagine if we knew every oak as he and every
birch as she.
Birch as she, you know. Would you take a chainsaw quite so easily? I think not. I think it's got a lot to answer for, the word it. Anyway, where had I got to?
Well, we were basically agreeing with different words and different theologies, which is exactly the aim of the podcast. The tradition that I come from does teach that all humans, in a similar way, are both masculine and feminine, and we have to hold balance in the centre between the two. And technically, I mean, it's not biologically technically, but mystically technically, a born woman is 52% feminine and 48% masculine, and a born man is 52% masculine and 48% feminine, or something like that. That's what I was taught, and it's probably not quite like that, but the idea is that we've got to contain this yin and this yang, and we have to have the balance that's right for the incarnation we're in at the moment. So yes, I would totally agree with you, and it's worth mentioning pantheism and panentheism, I think, simply because people are going to go, what? Pagan folk are called pantheists by religious folk. And it's intended to be rude, though. There you go. How would you describe pantheism? Because I'm a panentheist. You're probably a pantheist. Let's discuss that.
Well, no, I don't. There's another of those ands. So primarily, the first word I would use for me is that I am an animist, because I do believe in spirit in everything. For exactly the reasons that I just outlined. There's nothing that isn't made of God and by God, of the goddess and by the goddess, and therefore how can there possibly be anything that doesn't have spirit? It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
Either everything is sacred or nothing is.
Yeah, totally. And then so the step on from that is, firstly, I'm animist. So secondly, I'm pantheist, in that I believe, I feel the local gods. So what are sometimes described as the genius loci, the spirits of place. I have a theory, which I don't think I've got any way of ever proving, partly because I don't have time to do the research, but that to me there's no mistake at all that the words of many of our most ancient goddesses are the words of our rivers. And I firmly believe that one of the most ancient gods and goddesses were the rivers. The spirit of water in a particular body of water is the goddess. Of course it is. We totally depend on that water for life. We are, 98%, 78%? I can't remember. We are water. So is everything else. Even rocks are part water. There is no bit of life which doesn't contain any drop of water. And so to me, the pantheon of gods takes in all the beautiful ways in which each piece of land is different. So the goddess of this patch of land here, so the general goddess of the larger body of the moor, might easily be considered to be the Dart. This is Dart Moor. We are the moor upon which the east and the west Dart meet and join into the River Dart. So she is our goddess, and she is going to be an incredibly different goddess to a goddess in Norfolk or in East Anglia or, good Lord, in Afghanistan or in Africa somewhere. Those goddesses, they're going to be very different beings because they have manifested as a completely different flavour of land. But then, maybe I'm also a monotheist, because maybe I believe ultimately in this universe, one song, one goddess, this void place from which everything is generated. To me, that's clearly, there's a unity, a wholeness. It's beyond our comprehension. It's beyond matter, which, as an aside, is a word which comes from the word mater, which means mother. And so, of course, matter is the body of the goddess. Matter is Gaia. But so maybe there's only one. Maybe there is this great unity of being that is only one. So I'm all of those things. But your word I'd never heard before.
Panentheist.
Okay,
yes.
Explain.
Well, it's actually what you were explaining. So I'm extremely comfortable about that. Pantheism, we're taught, is that God is all things. Whereas panentheism is that spirit is all things. All things are spirit, like this Christ, this Adam Kadmon. And, this is the there is a transcendent consciousness, which is the overarching consciousness of all.
Okay, yeah.
So that actually works quite well, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Okay. Panentheist.
And the and thing, we came to it late in Christianity. Peter Abelard, the legend of Abelard and Eloise?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Peter Abelard was a Christian theologian, and he wrote a book called Sic et Non, which sounds like yes and no, but the whole thesis of it was to go yes and instead of yes but. And I do try and do that. It's non-dual thinking, isn't it? Mm. Yes, and it's just so much more flowing. And again, we're talking about rivers and relationships. Oh, yes, that reminded me. Thank you, whoever reminded me of that. This living water thing of the goddess. Miriam, Moses' sister, was the one that brought the water to the Israelites in the desert. Wherever Miriam went, there was water. Mm. And the first temple was built so that there was living water flowing through the Holy of Holies, because the water was sacred. It had to be moving water. And even nowadays in Orthodox Jewry, they have the mikveh, which is the ritual cleansing bath, which sounds terrible, again, if you don't go into it. This idea of actually going and having a cleansing, a complete cleansing, mind, body, spirit, and everything in flowing waters regularly is a lovely idea. Mm. And the mikveh had to be moving water. It could never be still water, because the flow was the whole important thing.
How exquisite is that? I love that the Holy of Holies had to have flowing water.
And one of the legends that why the first temple was destroyed was that there was an earthquake around that time, so it would have changed the water flow in the land. So maybe the water stopped flowing, and they took it as a sign that the temple had become corrupt. Maybe it had become corrupt, we'll never know. And said, okay, that's it, that line of worship is over. And then what they did, King Josiah's high priest went into the Holy of Holies and found the book of Deuteronomy and Numbers. with all the written law. Not all the written law, but a vast amount of the thou shalt, thou shalt, thou shalt. And I think the truth, ultimate truth of any faith is that when it becomes law over love, you've lost it. Because the whole point, I keep saying the whole point of Jesus, there are hundreds of points of this great metaphorical story, is that he interpreted the law through love. Whereas Orthodox religion tends to interpret love through the law. And we have 3 levels of evil in the prophets in the Old Testament. Father Richard Raw, the Franciscan teacher in Albuquerque, New Mexico, taught me this one, and he's an amazing man. And I'm part of the Franciscan orthopraxy now. It's like an orthodoxy, but it's praxy. Franciscans were supposed to be out in the communion teaching about loving the universe and the animals and bringing it all together. So I'm part of the Franciscan orthopraxy. But these 3 levels of evil, they're very clear. The world, the flesh, and the devil. Everybody focuses on the flesh because it's the soft target. But the world is the status quo, the system, how things operate. And we don't critique it because we're usually in it. We don't critique something that benefits us. We don't critique the fact that we all live in houses because that's what we do. We don't critique the fact that we fight wars because that's what we do. We don't critique the fact that we've got governments because that's what we do. We don't critique this, that or the other, but we're meant to critique it because from the world come the sins of the flesh, because the world decides what's right or wrong. So if you go and do an individual sin like stealing something or having sex with the wrong person allegedly or that kind of thing, it's very easy to point the finger at that one person instead of saying, how did the world create this to be a sin and is it a sin? It's not questioned. But that's where the focus of Orthodox Christianity is, on the sin, on the idea of abortion being wrong or homosexuality being wrong, that kind of thing. And we must go into that because the original Hebrew does not say that. However, the 3rd level of sin is the devil. And that's when you make a virtue of the world. And this is probably going to be quite controversial. Wars may have to be fought. There may be a reason why we have to fight a war. I think probably it was wise to stand up against Hitler.
Indeed.
However, you don't make that a virtue. You make that a sadness. The world's sorrow is that we must go and fight. The world's sorrow is that we have to stand up for this. You do not make soldiers heroes. You do not say that somebody who has gone to kill somebody else's children is a hero. The Japanese actually had this right. They had something called, I can't remember what it's called, the something soldier. I have to try and find the relevant phrase for that. But when the soldier comes back from war, he was put into a ritual that forgave him for what he had to do and released him from being a soldier. And it probably worked with PTSD.
I was going to say, my goodness, can you imagine if our soldiers had access to that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But what we do, and it's understandable, but we go, oh, the soldiers are heroes. No, I'm sorry, they're not. They're doing what we have sent them to do in sorrow. And then you come back to the pro-life group, and I'm passionate about this. You cannot say that you're anti-abortion because you're pro-life and then approve war. And you cannot refuse to feed starving people, and you cannot put children in cages and say you are pro-life, because your pro-life stops the second that embryo is born.
Yeah.
That is not pro-life. That is selective, focusing on the sins of the flesh. And until we reweave the world, we cannot avoid those other 2 sets of sins. And the sins of the flesh are only ever coming from the judgment of the sin of the world.
Yeah.
Isn't it fascinating?
It is fascinating. To me, that's one of the things that I hope that we're doing, and I'm quietly laughing inside of myself that we're already being so controversial. We were bound to be controversial, and I'm sure there will be much mud slung. But that,
I don't know.
I think it's vital that we critique everything.
Yes.
And the the way, to me, I mean, I'm going to sling some mud now. To the way, for me, one of the things that's difficult about my perception of Christianity and of the Christian church is the way that it has, in my opinion, and you know, I really want to emphasize to you and to any dear soul listening that part of why I'm so interested in having this conversation is that I realize that my version of all spiritual pathways that aren't my own are filtered through the culture in which I live, and the culture in which I live, from my conversation with you, it seems, has got what Christianity is quite wrong. And I see that as soon as we start writing stuff in books and saying, this is the law, this is how it is, this is the one and only authentic experience, and if yours differs from this, you're wrong. And that as soon as you start putting authority into books, then you start surrendering your own authority. And as soon as you start surrendering your own authority, your capacity to critique the world slowly shrivels and dies. And that once your capacity to critique is ailing, if not dead, then making a virtue of the world, so your definition of the devil, becomes something you become totally invested in, because if it's a bad thing and you perceive it to be a bad thing, then you're going to sink too. So your very existence is dependent upon the world in which you live being a good thing. So I really, really see this with it. There's one way in which this plays out in our life in a particularly damaging way, in my opinion. And that is our relationship with nature as mediated through the food that we eat. So at the moment, the majority of people access the food that they eat through businesses. So through, I want to call it an institution, through institutions like Sainsbury's. So who is the hand that feeds us? Well, in altogether too many people's case, it's Sainsbury's. So who do we need to defend and protect? Sainsbury's.
Other supermarkets are available.
Oh, yes. Yes, this is not a podcast sponsored by whatever they're called, JS. Yes, perhaps that's very bad. Apologies to all the other supermarkets, not hitherto mentioned, and indeed to small retailers. But my point is that
we're disconnected.
We're totally disconnected. And while we're relying on shops, whether they be large or small, to fill our bellies, we're going to be invested in protecting the paradigm in which those shops survive. And again, I'm not saying that shops are necessarily a bad thing, but that if we had more direct contact with our food, so to me, growing a garden and growing food in particular is one of the most effective and easily achievable radical acts of rebellion that you can undertake, because then your food is growing freely outside, which, let's face it, the truth of the matter is all food is freely given by the goddess. Gaia is tomatoes and lettuces and potatoes and all the other wonderful things that people eat. That is Gaia. That is the goddess. It is her body. And therefore that sacrament of...
this is my body given for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's freely given day after day after day. And if we really knew that, if we knew it in our daily experience, then it would be her that we defended, not the institutions of what's become consumer culture and the patriarchy and all the rest of it. And that's a fundamental, I don't know.
Sacrament.
No, I was going the other way. It's a fundamental wrongness in the way that we live, that we've lost our connection to the really, really basic truth that life, capital L, feeds life, ours, freely always.
And we charge.
And we charge.
And that's the end of the second podcast, because we've run way over the time
Oh,
we set for ourselves. No, it's wonderful. And we'll come back and talk more on this very soon. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye from the Vicar.
And goodbye from the Witch.